I sat in a hospital parking lot at 11 o'clock at night, gripping the steering wheel of my Uber car so hard my knuckles had gone white. A 74-year-old man named Leland Foss was sitting in my back seat, and he had just said 9 words that cracked my entire life wide open. Your father didn't cut you out because he didn't love you. He cut you out because you were the only one he trusted. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I just sat there with the engine running and tears falling down my face while this stranger, this frail old man with a cane and a gray suit that hung off his shoulders like it belonged to someone twice his size, watched me fall apart in the rearview mirror. 3 months before that night, my father, Gerald Mercer, died at 79 years old. He left behind a real estate empire worth $52 million. He left behind a penthouse in Nashville that overlooked the entire city. He left behind a 60-foot yacht docked in Miami. He left behind 2 sons who had been groomed their whole lives to inherit everything. And he left behind me, Donovan Mercer, 48 years old, his 3rd son, the one who got nothing. I don't mean I got less than my brothers. I mean I got nothing. Not a dollar, not a watch, not a sentence in his will that even acknowledged I existed. My father divided his entire fortune between my oldest brother Brock and my middle brother Wade. And when the lawyer finished reading that document out loud in his office in Nashville, my name had not been spoken once. Brock is 55. He's the kind of man who walks into a room and expects everyone to stand up. Tall, broad, silver hair, slicked back, always wearing a suit that costs more than most people's rent. He took over Mercer Properties 5 years before our father died, and by the time Gerald passed, Brock had already been running the company like it was his birthright. The will just made it official. He got the penthouse, the controlling shares, and the bulk of the commercial properties. Tens of millions of dollars handed to a man who already acted like he owned the world. Wade is 51. He's quieter than Brock, but just as complicit. Wade never had the spine to lead, so he followed. Whatever Brock said, Wade agreed with. Whatever Brock wanted, Wade supported. He inherited the yacht, several residential properties across Tennessee and Florida, and a cash payout that would let him live like a king for the rest of his life. Wade never once stood up for me. Not when we were kids, not when our father was alive, and certainly not when the will was read. I sat in that lawyer's office wearing the only decent shirt I owned. I had driven 3 hours from Knoxville to Nashville because some small, foolish part of me still believed that maybe after all those years of silence and distance, my father had remembered me. Maybe he had left me something, even a letter, even a line that said he knew I existed and that I mattered to him. He didn't. When the lawyer closed the folder, Brock turned to me. He didn't whisper. He didn't even lower his voice. He said it right there in front of the lawyer, in front of Wade, in front of God and everyone. Dad never loved you, Donovan. He told us that himself. You were Mama's boy. And when she died, he had no use for you. I didn't say a word. I stood up, walked out of that office, got in my car, and drove 3 hours back to Knoxville in complete silence. No radio, no phone calls. Just the road and the sound of my own breathing. And the feeling that everything I had secretly hoped for had been confirmed as a lie. My mother's name was Lorraine. She died when I was 12. Cancer. She was the most loving person I have ever known in my life. She used to sit with me on the back porch of our house and tell me I was going to do great things. She called me her gentle one. When she got sick, I was the one who brought her water in the middle of the night. I was the one who held her hand when the pain got bad. Brock and Wade were teenagers by then, already circling our father like satellites, already learning the business, already becoming his chosen sons. But I was with my mother. I was always with my mother. When she died, something broke inside my father. I saw it happen in real time. He stopped looking at me. He stopped speaking to me at dinner. He would take Brock and Wade to property sites on weekends and leave me at home with a housekeeper. I asked him once when I was 15, standing in the doorway of his office while he reviewed contracts. I said, "Dad, why don't you ever take me with you?" He looked up at me with this expression I will never forget. It wasn't anger. It wasn't annoyance. It was something closer to pain. And he said, "You're different from your brothers, Donovan. You'll understand someday." I never understood. I spent the next 33 years of my life believing that being different meant being less. That my father saw something in Brock and Wade that he didn't see in me. That when my mother died, whatever love he had for me died with her. So, I built my own life. I learned cabinet making from an old man named Gus, who lived 2 streets over from us. I moved to Knoxville at 22, started working in a wood shop, eventually saved enough to open my own. I got married to a woman named Jolene. We had a daughter, Ruthie, the absolute light of my life. For a while, things were good. Not rich, not flashy, but good. Honest work, a small house, a family. Then, in 2020, the shop went under. I lost everything. Jolene tried to hold on, but 6 years of financial strain broke us apart, and she left. I don't blame her. I really don't. She didn't sign up to watch her husband drown. Ruthie was already away at school by then, studying nursing in Charlotte, so it was just me, alone. 42 years old. No business, no wife, no savings. I started picking up odd jobs, carpentry work here and there, handiwork for neighbors. Then I signed up to drive Uber because the bills didn't care about my pride. Every morning, I woke up in a 1-bedroom apartment near the highway in Knoxville, put on a clean shirt, got in my car, and drove strangers around the city for 10 to 12 hours. I made just enough to cover rent, food, gas, and the phone bill so Ruthie could call me every Sunday. She always asked how I was doing. I always lied. I told her I had picked up some freelance carpentry work. I told her things were looking up. I told her I was fine. I wasn't fine. I was 48 years old, and I had nothing to show for my life, except a daughter who loved me, and a last name that belonged to a family that had thrown me away. That's who I was the night Leland Foss got into my car. That's the man he found behind the wheel. Broken, quiet, driving through Knoxville at 7 o'clock in the evening, picking up a fare from a medical clinic on the east side of town. I didn't know who he was. I didn't know what he carried. I didn't know that everything I had believed about my father, about my brothers, about my own worth, was about to be turned inside out by a dying man with a manila envelope and a secret that had been buried for 30 years. My name is Donovan Mercer, and this is the story of the night I found out the truth. If you are watching this for the first time, you are in the right place. My name is Buddy, and I share real stories of real people that will leave you speechless. So go ahead and subscribe, tap that bell, and let's get into it, because this one is going to hit different. To understand what Leland Foss told me that night, you need to understand what my life looked like in the months after my father's funeral. Because the will reading wasn't the end of my humiliation. It was the beginning. After I walked out of that lawyer's office in Nashville, I didn't hear from Brock or Wade for weeks. Not a phone call, Not a text. Nothing. I told myself I didn't care. I told myself I had survived 48 years without their approval, and I could survive 48 more. But that was a lie I told myself in the daylight. At night, alone in that apartment, the truth was harder to hide. I replayed Brock's words over and over again. Dad never loved you. He told us that himself. And every time I heard it in my head, it cut a little deeper. I kept driving Uber. What else was I going to do? I had no savings, no business, no family money. I woke up at 5:30 every morning, showered, put on whatever clean shirt I had, and got behind the wheel. I drove business people to the airport. I drove college kids to bars on Friday nights. I drove old women to doctor's appointments and helped them carry their walkers to the front door. Some of them tipped me. Most of them didn't. I averaged about $140 on a good day. And after gas and the car payment, I was left with just enough to keep the lights on. The worst part wasn't the money. The worst part was the silence. I had no one to talk to. Jolene was gone. Ruthie called every Sunday, but those calls were 15 minutes of me pretending everything was fine while she told me about her classes and her clinicals and the patients she was learning to care for. She was 22 years old and building something beautiful with her life, and I refused to be the weight that dragged her down. So I smiled into the phone and said all the right things and hung up and sat in the dark. Meanwhile, Brock and Wade were living like the inheritance was a trophy they had won. I made the mistake of looking at social media one night when I couldn't sleep. Brock had posted photographs from the penthouse. He had redecorated it, new furniture, new art on the walls. He threw a party on the rooftop terrace with people I didn't recognize, all of them holding champagne glasses and laughing against the Nashville skyline. The caption said something about honoring our father's legacy. I almost threw my phone across the room. Wade was worse in a different way. He didn't flaunt like Brock did, but he spent like a man who had never known what it felt like to earn $1. He bought a new house in Memphis, 6 bedrooms, a pool, a 3-car garage. He posted a photo of himself standing in front of it with a set of keys in his hand and a grin on his face. I thought about how our father had started with nothing, how Gerald Mercer had bought his first property with borrowed money and spent years fixing it up with his own hands, and now his sons were burning through his fortune like it was kindling. I deleted the apps off my phone after that night. I couldn't look at it anymore. Not because I was jealous. I had never wanted $52 million. I had never wanted a yacht or a penthouse or a portfolio of commercial buildings. I wanted one thing from my father, just one thing. I wanted him to say that I mattered, that I was his son too, that losing my mother hadn't made me invisible to him. And he never said it. He died without saying it. And his will confirmed it in black and white. There were nights I sat in my car in the Walmart parking lot after my last ride, engine off, staring at nothing. I thought about calling Brock and asking him why. Why did Dad hate me? What did I do wrong? Was it because I looked like Mom? Was it because I stayed with her instead of following him? But I never called because I already knew what Brock would say. He would laugh. He would tell me to get over it. He would remind me that I was nothing, and he would enjoy every second of it. I was drowning and nobody knew. Not Ruthie, not the passengers who sat in my back seat and stared at their phones. Not the guy at the gas station who saw me every morning filling up the tank. I was a 48-year-old man falling apart in plain sight, and the world kept moving around me like I wasn't even there. That was my life on the evening of October 14th. when I pulled up to a medical clinic on the east side of Knoxville, and a 74-year-old man with a cane opened my back door and lowered himself into the seat. He gave me an address downtown, a hotel near Market Square. I said, "Yes, sir," and pulled out of the lot. And that's when I noticed him staring at me. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw his eyes locked on me. Not a casual look, not the absent gaze of someone lost in thought. This man was studying me the way you study a photograph you haven't seen in years. Like he was trying to match my face to something stored deep in his memory. I kept my eyes on the road and told myself it was nothing. Some passengers are just like that. Older folks especially. They watch. They observe. Maybe he was lonely. Maybe he was confused. Maybe he had me mixed up with someone else. I turned on the Chapman Highway and merged into traffic and tried to focus on the route. The hotel was about 20 minutes away, depending on lights. I figured I would drop him off, rate the ride, and move on to the next fare. But he didn't stop staring. 5 minutes in, I adjusted the mirror slightly, hoping he would look away. He didn't. His eyes were pale blue, almost gray, set deep in a thin face with sharp cheekbones and a jaw that looked like it had been carved from something harder than bone. He had a manila envelope on his lap. His hands were resting on top of it, the way a man rests his hands on a Bible. Still deliberate, like whatever was inside that envelope was the most important thing he owned. I cleared my throat. "Everything all right back there, sir?" He didn't answer right away, just kept looking at me. Then he said very quietly, "You look just like her." My stomach tightened. I didn't know what he meant, but something about the way he said it made the air in the car feel different, heavier. I asked him what he said, and he shook his head slowly, like he hadn't meant to speak out loud. "Nothing. I'm sorry. Just an old man talking to himself." I let it go. I drove through the intersection at Moody Avenue and turned onto the bridge. The river was dark below us, and the lights of downtown Knoxville were just starting to come into view. The GPS said we were 12 minutes away. I counted the minutes in my head because something about this ride was making me uneasy in a way I couldn't explain. He spoke again at the 8-minute mark. "How long have you been driving for Uber?" I told him about a year. He nodded. Then he said, "You used to build things, cabinets, furniture. You had a shop." I nearly swerved. My grip tightened on the wheel, and I looked at him in the mirror with full attention for the first time. "How do you know that?" He didn't flinch. He said, "I know a lot about you, Donovan." My full name, not from the app. The Uber app shows first names only. This man knew my last name. He knew about my shop. He knew things that a random passenger picking up a ride from a medical clinic had no business knowing. My heart was beating so hard I could feel it in my throat. I pulled up to the hotel. The GPS chimed, "Ride complete." I put the car in park and waited for him to get out. He didn't move. He just sat there with that envelope on his lap and those pale eyes fixed on me. "Sir, we're here." "I know where we are." "Are you getting out?" "Not yet." I turned around in my seat and looked at him directly. He was older than I had first thought, mid-70s at least. His skin was thin and papery, and his hands had a slight tremor that he was trying to control. The cane leaning against the seat beside him had a worn wooden handle, the kind of thing a man holds every single day for years. He was sick. I could see it in the hollows under his eyes and the way his collarbone pressed against his shirt. This was not a healthy man. "Your name is Donovan Mercer," he said. "Your father was Gerald Mercer. Your mother was Lorraine. She died in 1990 when you were 12 years old. You have two brothers, Brock and Wade, and 3 months ago, they inherited everything your father built, while you received nothing. I couldn't speak. My mouth opened, but nothing came out. I just stared at this man who knew my entire life and had climbed into my back seat on a random Tuesday evening like it was an accident. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. Old, yellowed at the edges. He held it up so I could read it. Leland Foss, attorney at law. Mercer Holdings retained counsel, 1996 to present. I worked for your father for 30 years, he said. I was his personal attorney. I handled every contract, every trust, every legal document Gerald Mercer ever signed. He paused and looked down at the envelope. I'm 74 years old. I have pancreatic cancer, and my doctors tell me I have about 4 months left. I've spent the last 6 weeks trying to find you. I went to your brothers first, hoping they would do the right thing. Brock threatened to sue me if I spoke a word. Wade wouldn't even return my calls. I asked him what he wanted. My voice was shaking and I couldn't stop it. He looked at me with an expression I will carry for the rest of my life. It was guilt. Deep, heavy, decades-old guilt that had been sitting in this man's chest like a stone. I need to tell you something that your father paid me to keep secret for 30 years. He made me sign a non-disclosure agreement the year your mother died, and I have honored it every single day since. But I am dying, Donovan, and I will not meet God carrying this. I pulled the car into the hotel parking lot and shut off the engine. My hands were trembling. The city was quiet around us, and Leland Foss opened that manila envelope. Leland pulled 3 documents from the envelope and held them under the dim parking lot light. His hands were shaking worse than mine, but his voice was steady, like a man who had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in his head and was finally saying the words out loud. In 1996, your father came to my office alone. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I remember because he canceled 3 meetings to be there. He sat across from my desk and told me he wanted to create a second will, a private one that nobody would ever see until the right time came. I asked him what he meant by a second will. Leland placed the first document on the seat between us. It was a legal document, thick, maybe 15 pages, with my father's signature at the bottom, in that sharp, angular handwriting I would recognize anywhere. Gerald Mercer, dated April 9th, 1996. This is that will, Leland said. In it, your father left the majority of his estate to you, not to Brock, not to Wade, to you, Donovan. The penthouse. Full controlling interest in Mercer Properties, 60% of all commercial holdings. Your father specifically named you as the person he trusted to carry on what he built. The parking lot tilted. That is the only way I can describe what happened inside my body. The world physically tilted like the ground had shifted beneath the car. I grabbed the door handle to steady myself and stared at that document like it was written in a language I couldn't read. Because what Leland was telling me didn't match anything I had believed for 36 years. My father had ignored me. My father had shut me out. My father had looked through me like I was made of glass. How could this same man have sat in a lawyer's office and written my name on a will that gave me everything? Leland saw the confusion on my face. He put his hand on the second document and said, "There's more." He explained that in addition to the will, Gerald had created a private trust in my name, funded it with $8 million in 1996 from profits he had quietly separated from the main business accounts. The trust was administered by Leland's firm under strict confidentiality. No one knew about it. Not Brock, not Wade, not even my mother, because she had already been gone for 6 years by then. That trust had been growing for 30 years through careful investment. It was now worth over $20 million. $20 million sitting in an account with my name on it while I drove strangers around Knoxville for $12 an hour. I asked Leland the only question that mattered. If my father wrote this will, if he created this trust, if he wanted me to have everything, then why did the will that was read in that lawyer's office 3 months ago leave me with nothing? Leland closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, I saw something that looked like shame. In 2015, your father was diagnosed with early-stage dementia. He hid it from everyone at first, but it progressed. By 2017, he was having episodes of confusion, forgetting names, losing track of conversations, repeating himself. Leland's voice dropped. Brock found out. I don't know exactly how, but Brock started visiting your father 3 to 4 times a week, always alone, always with documents. He brought his own attorney into the picture, a man named Kin, and together they began pressuring your father to sign a new will. I felt something hot and sharp rise in my chest. It wasn't sadness anymore. It was rage. Leland continued. He told me that Gerald resisted at first. Even in his diminished state, he pushed back. But Brock was relentless. He isolated Gerald from his own legal team. He convinced Wade to go along with it by promising him the yacht and the residential properties. And over the course of several months in 2017, Brock and his attorney drafted a new will that cut me out entirely, and had Gerald sign it during a period when his cognitive function was severely compromised. I tried to intervene, Leland said. I called your father's physician. I wrote letters to Brock warning him that what he was doing could constitute undue influence and elder abuse. Brock responded with a cease and desist from Kinlan's office and a reminder that my NDA was still in effect. I was bound by attorney-client privilege. I couldn't go public without risking disparment. I asked about the trust. If Brock found the second will, how did he miss the trust? Leland almost smiled. Because your father was smarter than all of them. He set up the trust through a separate entity that wasn't connected to Mercer Properties. By the time Brock discovered the second will, Gerald had already forgotten the trust existed, and I never told Brock about it. That was the one thing I protected. He placed the third document in my hands. It was a handwritten letter, 1 page, my father's handwriting, dated April 9th, 1996, the same day he signed the second will. I held it under the light and read it, and by the second sentence, I was crying so hard I couldn't see the words. The letter was written on plain white paper. No letterhead, no legal formatting, just my father's handwriting. The same handwriting I used to see on notes he left on the kitchen counter when I was a boy. Sharp letters that leaned slightly to the right, pressed hard into the page like the pen was an extension of his fist. It read, Donovan, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and the truth has finally reached you. I owe you an explanation that I was too afraid to give you while I was alive. Everything I did, every cold word, every turned back, every door I closed between us, was not because I didn't love you. It was because I loved you more than I knew how to show, and I was terrified that your brothers would destroy you if they knew. I had to stop reading. I pressed the letter against my chest and bent forward in the driver's seat until my forehead touched the steering wheel. Leland sat in silence behind me. He didn't say a word. He just let me break. After a few minutes, I wiped my face with the back of my hand and kept reading. Your mother saw it before I did. She told me once, a few months before she got sick, that you were the one who had my heart, but not my hardness. She said Brock and Wade would survive anything because they didn't feel things the way you did. She said I needed to protect you from them. I didn't understand what she meant until after she was gone. And I watched your brothers start circling like wolves. They wanted everything. They wanted control. And I knew that if they saw me favor you, they would turn on you, the way they turned on anyone who stood between them and what they believed they deserved. My mother, Lorraine, she had seen it 36 years ago. She had seen what Brock and Wade were becoming before they even became it. And she had told my father to shield me. And my father, in the only way he knew how, had done exactly that. He had pushed me away to keep me safe. He had made me invisible so that Brock and Wade would never see me as a threat. The letter continued. I built this empire with my hands, Donovan. Every brick, every contract, every negotiation. And I watched your brothers turn it into a game, a scoreboard, a way to measure themselves against other men. But you were never like that. You built things with your hands, too. You learned to craft. You married a good woman. You raised a daughter. You did everything I respected, and nothing I had to be ashamed of. That is why I am leaving this to you. Not because Brock and Wade don't deserve something, they do. But the heart of what I built belongs to the son who understands what it costs me to build it. I read that paragraph 3 times. Each time it hit me in a different place. The first time in my chest. The second time in my throat. The third time somewhere so deep I couldn't name it. My father had watched me from a distance my entire life. He had seen me struggle. He had seen me build and lose and rebuild. And he had never said a word. Because he believed his silence was the only armor he could give me. The last paragraph of the letter was the one that shattered me completely. I know I failed you as a father. I know there were nights you needed me and I wasn't there. I know you went to bed in that house believing you were alone. And I am sorry. I am sorry for every dinner I didn't sit beside you. I am sorry for every birthday I let pass without telling you what you meant to me. I am sorry for the day you stood in my office doorway and asked me why I never took you with me. And I gave you an answer that must have broken your heart. You are different from your brothers, Donovan, but different was never less. Different was always more. You are the best of us, and if I had one wish, it would be that you believe that. I folded the letter carefully along its original creases and held it in both hands like it was made of glass. Leland was watching me in the mirror. His own eyes were wet. Your father gave me that letter the same day he signed the second will, he said. He told me to keep it with the trust documents and make sure it reached you when the time came. I have carried it in my office safe for 30 years. I sat in that parking lot for a long time. The hotel lobby glowed orange through the glass doors 20 feet away. People walked in and out like the world was still turning normally. A woman laughed somewhere. A car honked on the street, and I sat there holding a letter from a dead man who had loved me in secret for my entire life. I picked up my phone and called Ruthie. She answered on the second ring. She said, "Hey, Dad, everything okay?" I told her no. I told her everything. The passenger, the lawyer, the second will, the trust, the letter. I read her the last line out loud. You are the best of us. And my daughter, my 22-year-old girl, who had never once let me down, said through her own tears, "Dad, you need to fight. Not for the money, for Grandpa. He kept his promise to you. Now you keep yours to him." I called a probate attorney the next morning before the sun came up. The attorney's name was Colton Briggs. He was a probate lawyer in Knoxville who had been practicing for over 20 years. And when I sat across from his desk at 8 o'clock in the morning with that manila envelope in my hands, he looked at the documents for less than 5 minutes before he leaned back in his chair and said, "Mr. Mercer, your brothers committed textbook undue influence on a man with diminished mental capacity. This isn't just a civil matter. This is borderline elder abuse." He took my case that morning. I couldn't afford his retainer, but when I showed him the trust documents, and he verified that the $20 million trust was real and legally mine, he agreed to work on contingency against the estate recovery. He told me this would be a fight. Brock had money, lawyers, and the arrogance of a man who believed he had already won. But Colton said the evidence was overwhelming, and if Leland Foss was willing to testify, we had everything we needed. Leland was willing, more than willing. He told me he had been waiting 30 years to say these things out loud, and he wasn't going to let Brock's threats or a cancer diagnosis stop him. He gave a sworn deposition from his hotel room 3 days later. Colton recorded every word. Leland described in precise detail how Gerald had created the second will in 1996, how the trust was established and funded, how Brock had discovered the secret will during Gerald's decline, and how Brock and his attorney Kinland had systematically pressured a man with dementia into signing a replacement document that erased me from the family. Colton filed the challenge in probate court in Nashville within 2 weeks. The grounds were undue influence and diminished mental capacity. The evidence included the original second will with Gerald's signature, the trust documents, Leland's sworn testimony, and Gerald's medical records showing a dementia diagnosis in 2015, 2 full years before the final will was signed. Brock responded exactly the way I expected him to. He called me 3 days after he was served. I was sitting in my car between rides when his name appeared on my phone. I almost didn't answer, but I did. His voice was ice cold. "You're a broke Uber driver, Donovan. You think you can take me on? Dad left you nothing because you are nothing. Drop this before I bury you." I didn't argue with him. I didn't defend myself. I didn't raise my voice. I just said, "I'll see you in court, Brock," and I hung up. The hearing took place 6 weeks later in a Nashville probate courtroom. Brock showed up with a team of 3 attorneys led by Kinland himself, the same man who had drafted the fraudulent will. Wade sat beside him, looking pale and uncomfortable, like a man who had just realized the ground beneath him was no longer solid. Brock sat with his arms crossed and his jaw tight, radiating the kind of confidence that comes from a lifetime of never being told no. Colton presented the case methodically. He entered the second will into evidence. He presented the trust documents. He showed the judge Gerald's medical records, including notes from his physician, confirming significant cognitive decline beginning in 2014 and worsening steadily through 2017 when the final will was signed. He presented Brock's own visitation records from the gated community where Gerald lived, showing that Brock had visited Gerald 73 times in the 6 months before the final will was executed. 73 visits, each one a chance to pressure a confused old man into giving away his son's birthright. Then Leland took the stand. He walked slowly to the witness chair, leaning on his cane, his gray suit still too big for his shrinking frame. He sat down and looked directly at the judge, not at Brock, not at Kinland, at the judge. And he spoke with the steady, precise voice of a man who had spent his entire career choosing his words carefully. He described the day Gerald came to his office in 1996. He described Gerald's exact words about why he wanted to leave the estate to me. He recounted how Gerald said, "Brock and Wade will spend it. Donovan will grow it." He testified about the trust, The NDA, the 30 years of silence. He described how Brock had threatened him when he tried to come forward after Gerald's death. And then he said something that made the entire courtroom go still. In the spring of 2024, roughly 8 months before Gerald passed, I visited him at his home. He was having a lucid day. They were rare by then, but this was one of them. He recognized me. He asked about the trust. He asked if Donovan was safe, and then he grabbed my arm with more strength than I thought he still had. And he looked me in the eyes and said, "Don't let them take it from Donovan. Promise me, Leland, don't let them take it." Brock's lead attorney tried to discredit Leland on cross-examination. He called him a disgruntled former employee with a vendetta. He questioned why Leland had waited so long to come forward. He suggested that Leland's cancer medication might be affecting his memory. Leland didn't flinch. He reached into his briefcase and produced time-stamped emails between himself and Gerald's physician, dating back to 2015. Billing records from his firm documenting every interaction with Gerald and a copy of the cease and desist letter Brock had sent him. Every claim he made was backed by paper. The judge deliberated for less than a week. When we returned to the courtroom for the ruling, I sat behind Colton with my hands folded in my lap. Ruthie had driven up from Charlotte the night before and was sitting beside me. She held my hand so tight I could feel her pulse. The judge ruled that Gerald Mercer's final will, executed in 2017, was invalid on the grounds of undue influence exerted by Brock Mercer and facilitated by Wade Mercer upon a man with documented diminished mental capacity. The second will, dated 1996, was reinstated as the governing document of Gerald Mercer's estate. Controlling interest in Mercer Properties, the Nashville penthouse, and 60% of all commercial holdings were awarded to me. The trust, valued at $22 million, was confirmed as my sole legal property. Brock and Wade were each left with what the original second will had allocated to them, a cash inheritance of $500,000 each. Brock stood up so fast his chair scraped across the floor. He pointed at me across the courtroom and said, "This isn't over." Kinlan grabbed his arm and pulled him toward the door. They left without another word. Wade didn't move. He sat at that table, staring straight ahead with his hands flat on the surface, like a man who had just watched his entire life rearrange itself in front of him. I walked out of that courthouse into the afternoon sun. Nashville was loud and bright and alive around me. Ruthie was beside me, her arm hooked through mine. She looked up at me and said, "Grandpa kept his promise, Dad." I nodded because I couldn't speak. My throat was too tight and my eyes were too full. I called Leland that evening from the hotel. He answered on the first ring like he had been sitting by the phone waiting. I told him what happened. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Good. That's good." His voice was tired, but it was lighter than I had ever heard it, like a man who had finally set down something impossibly heavy. 6 months have passed since that ruling. I sold the penthouse. It was too big, too cold, and it still smelled like Brock's cologne. I used part of the money to restructure Mercer Properties and hired a team of people who actually care about building something real instead of just extracting profit. I'm not a real estate mogul. I never wanted to be one. But I'm a builder. I know how to work with my hands, how to look at something broken and figure out how to make it whole again. My father saw that in me before I saw it in myself. Ruthie graduated from nursing school last month. I sat in the front row. When she walked across that stage and took her diploma, she looked straight at me and smiled. After the ceremony, she ran to me and said, "Grandpa would be so proud of you." I told her he would be prouder of her. Leland Foss passed away 3 months after the trial. Pancreatic cancer took him on a Wednesday morning in a hospice facility in Knoxville. I visited him twice before he went. The last time I saw him, he was lying in a narrow bed with the blinds open and the sunlight coming through the window in long golden stripes across the floor. He looked small, smaller than the man who had sat in my back seat that night, but his eyes were the same, clear and sharp and full of something that looked like peace. He said, "I spent 30 years keeping your father's secret. The only thing I regret is not breaking it sooner." I held his hand and said, "You broke it when it mattered, Leland. That's all that counts." Brock hasn't spoken to me since the courtroom. I don't expect he ever will. Wade sent me a text about 2 months after the ruling. 4 words. "I'm sorry. I should have told you." I read it. I put the phone down. I haven't responded. I don't know if I ever will. Some doors close, and they should stay closed. Forgiveness isn't something I owe anyone. If it comes, it will come on my time. I still drive through Knoxville sometimes. Not for Uber, not for money, just to remember. I pass the medical clinic on the east side of town where Leland got into my car. And I slow down every single time. I think about how one ride changed everything. One passenger. One man who decided that the truth mattered more than a contract, more than a threat, more than his own comfort. A dying man who used his last months on earth to right a wrong that had been done to someone he had never even met. I keep my father's letter in my nightstand drawer. I read it when the doubt creeps back in. When I hear Brock's voice in my head saying, "Dad never loved you." When I wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and the old wound tries to open again. I unfold that paper and I read the last line. The one my father wrote 30 years ago for the son he couldn't hold but never stopped loving. "You are the best of us." I believe him now. If this story touched your heart, do me a favor. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. Drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever discovered a truth about your family that changed the way you saw everything? I read every single comment, and I would love to hear your story. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and tap the bell so you never miss a story.